Hey everyone, it's Kitetails, and welcome back to another video about Elden Ring and a deep dive into some of the lore and outstanding questions I still have about this game. So originally this video was just going to be about the rises, which are those towers you find all around the map that you had to open by finding the three wise ones, those super annoying ghost turtles. But then this turned into a, well, who was Ranni's secret mentor video, because I think that question is answered in part by understanding what the rises are and who they belong to and the significance of where they are located. So just laying some groundwork down before we look into the identity of the mysterious Snow Witch, let's take a look at these rises. There are 12 of these in total, and I think that they were established after Renna became head of Lucaria, and I came to this conclusion because of the geography of where they are located. So the highest concentration of them are in Liurnia, and we find 3 of them bunched up right together behind Caria Manor, so this was clearly an important area to protect and defend. The rises have the seal of Lucaria on the doors, which is the same seal guarding the academy, and the same seal as the booby trap spells found all around Caria Manor, and also other Carian controlled points like the Moonfolk runes. And this seal is different from the seal of the Carian sorceries, so I think that we can date the creation of these rises to Renna becoming head of the academy and establishing her family as royalty and wanting to keep herself safe and protected. The 2 rises that stand out are the Converted Tower and the Converted Fringe Tower, which contain statues of America, and this is because during the First Liurnian War, these 2 rises were captured by Radagon and the Lindell armies, thus the name Converted Towers. And while nearly every single one of these rises is surrounded by these beautiful deep blue flowers representing the presence of glintstone magic, the presence of Caria, the Converted Tower is surrounded by yellow flowers, signifying a full capture by the army of the Golden Order. And even more interestingly, there is a detail that I have only now just realized, and that is that the ground of the Church of Vows is covered in a mixture of blue and yellow flowers, which symbolizes the union of the houses of the Erd Tree and of the Moon. And I thought this was such a cute detail and just a testament to how much work went into designing the environment of this game. The rises all have the same interior, and they look like a typical wizard's library or a research room, and I think that's what they were originally used for surveillance and studying sorcery, charting the stars, the moon, and I also found that the majority of them seem to be within sight of these minor Erd trees, like these rises were established in order to keep an eye on those pesky Erd tree offshoots. So we can understand Ranni's rise and Celavis's rise as this is where they lived, but who was Renna? Renna has extreme significance to Ranni, as this is the name that she uses when Ranni first introduces herself. Her appearance is modeled after her mentor, the Snow Witch, and it's at Renna's rise that the Snow Witch set can be found. Although there is this weird thing when E.G. mentions Renna's rise, he seems to have this inflection in his voice that makes it seem as if this was a personal name that Ranni used and not necessarily the true name of the rise.
Lady Ranni has departed on her journey along the dark path of Empyrean from Renna's Rise, as she calls it.
I asked on a poll on YouTube who everyone thought the Snow Witch was, and overwhelmingly the answer was Renna. So this still doesn't answer the question of who is Renna, and as influential as the Snow Witch was to Ranni, we don't know much anything about her. Her pointed hat is described as being a style associated with practitioners of heretical sorcery, and her set explains that a young Ranni encountered her deep in the woods. She was a witch and well-versed in cold sorceries. It is said that the doll that houses Ranni's soul was modeled after her. So if this is literal, then the Ranni we encounter in the game has the appearance of the Snow Witch, which means that she might have had blue skin and 4 arms. The only blue-skinned 4-armed beings that we see in the game are Wraith Callers, who use a bell to summon malevolent wraiths. So is it possible that the Snow Witch was a Wraith Caller? Possibly. Ranni is how they might have looked in their youth once upon a time. And their arms aren't grafted onto their body. It seems like they are actually part of their skin. Looks like they just have 4 arms. The Wraith Callers also use a bell, and Ranni is the one who gives you the spirit calling bell and says that it belonged to Torrent's former master. And while the Wraith Callers do ride horses, I'm not so sure if they're the same species as Torrent. There's also a group of these Wraith Callers and a revenant found at the Lunar Estate ruins, which is where the Carians presumably used to reside at one time. So there might be a little connection here to this theory, but I don't think this argument of the Snow Witch being a Wraith Caller is really strong enough to say for certain. Ranni's puppet body could also just be a repurposed Marionette soldier, which is the other 4-armed beings we find in game, because these artificial soldiers were created to serve the sorcerers. And the majority of them are found around Liurnia and Re Lucaria, and it doesn't seem like they have any particular allegiance to either the Carian family or the Academy, but rather the sorcerer who commissioned them. But there is one rise where you see a good number of these marionette puppets stationed, and that is at the Heretical Rise in the Consecrated Snowfields. And there are a ton of them in this area. It's a super high concentration for just this one rise. So they are either protecting the inhabitant of this rise, or they were stationed here to keep someone from leaving it. I also think it's interesting to note that this rise can only be accessed through the back on an invisible bridge. Someone, whoever lived here, escaped from the tower by making this invisible bridge so that they couldn't be followed and they couldn't be tracked. That is at least how I'm imagining it in my head. So I'm kind of leaning towards the theory that whoever was here was under house arrest and they later escaped through the back using this invisible bridge. So there are a few connections we can make here in this location to the Snow Witch. For one, her hat is being described as the fashion of heretical sorcerers, and the name of this rise is the Heretical Rise. It's also in the Consecrated Snowfields, which is another link to the Snow Witch and her snow sorceries. And then we have the multitude of 4-armed marionette soldiers, which may be a reference to the sorcerer that created them to guard this rise. It's also here that you can find the Founding Reign of Stars spell, which is described as the eldest primeval sorcery said to have been discovered by an ancient astrologer. So this is the OG sorcery. This is the foundation of all of the glintstone sorcery that followed. And it was discovered by an ancient astrologer, which might mean that the inhabitant of the Heretical Rise, like Renna, was once an astrologer. And we know that astrologers predated sorcerers based on the description of the Sword of Night and Flame, which says that astrologers preceded the sorcerers and established themselves in the mountaintops that nearly touched the sky. Renna was an astrologer in her youth and later became the Full Moon Witch. And the sorcerer painting puzzle leads you to the Consecrated Snowfields and this location to find the Great Hood. And that is described as a burial shroud for those who discover at long last the truth they sought. Surely this is the moon that the young Renna gazed upon. And this spot right here where you can see that moon clear as crystal is next to the Stargazer's ruins. So we can assume this is where the astrologers must have lived next to their neighbors, the fire giants. The Stargazer heirloom says that the young astrologer gazed at the night sky as she walked. She'd always chase the stars at every step of her journey, and then she met the moon, and in time the astrologer became a queen. The telescope has some really interesting information that I had never seen before, and it's described as being an astrology tool used by members of the Carian royal family. During the age of the Erd Tree, Carian astrology withered on the vine. The fate once writ in the night skies had been fettered by the Golden Order. And fettered means shackled and restrained. To me, this sounds like Renna didn't even have a choice in her leaving the Carian path of astrology, that the Erd Tree had the same kind of effect on obscuring the stars, like light pollution. It just choked it out. This means that the reason astrologers became sorcerers in the first place and pursued glintstone magic was because they had to adapt to the Erd Tree killing their stargazing. So all of the rises that were most likely linked to astrology at one time transitioned to the pursuit of glintstone sorcery. There is one theory that proposes Renala was the Snow Witch in disguise, and that Renna was just a nickname she used. Because it's here in the consecrated Snowfields that Renala left the path of astrologer and pursued lunar sorcery. You would think here in this environment with the Zamor and the Zamor's ice magic, it might have given Renala an opportunity to learn cold sorcery. The description of Renala's full moon states that Queen Renala encountered this enchanting moon when she was young, and later it would bewitch the academy. So we know that the sorcerer painting, we know that based on this description of her remembrance, this happened in the consecrated Snowfields, putting her in a location to be introduced to lunar sorcery, but also she may have had the opportunity to learn cold sorcery. Ranni's dark moon states that this moon was encountered by a young Ranni, led by the hand of her mother, Renala. What she beheld was cold, dark, and veiled in occult mystery. Now, all of the cold sorceries associated with the Snow Witch have the same description. Sorcery said to have been used by the old Snow Witch. The snowy crone taught the young Ranni to fear the dark moon as she imparted her cold sorcery. We have two instances of a young Ranni being introduced to these different sorceries seemingly around the same time during her youth. Renala teaches Ranni lunar sorcery, and the Snow Witch teaches her cold sorcery. But whereas Renala discovered the full moon in the consecrated Snowfields, Ranni most likely discovered it at the Moonlight Altar, because it's only at this location on the map that you can see both the full moon and the dark moon. And there is something else here that you can see at the Moonlight Altar, and that is snow. It's floating around throughout the air, and it's not glintstone mist, which you can see specks of at Caria Manor and at the Three Sisters. This here definitely appears to be snow. From the windows of the Cathedral of Manus Celeste, you can see the full moon and the dark moon. And this cathedral actually has the same architecture as the Church of Vows, which I thought was really interesting. It also has the same statues of a hooded knight, and I think that this figure is Ratigan, which would make sense as he's featured here at the cathedral as the husband of the full moon witch, and also at the Church of Vows where he and Renala were married. And in the southernmost tip of the Moonlight Altar is Chilona's Rise, which is where you find Ranni's dark moon spell. So I think we can say for certainty that we now know the location of where Ranni learned her dark moon sorcery and also her cold sorcery. So the proponents of this theory that believe the Snow Witch was just Renala in disguise might argue, oh, isn't that just so convenient to have this sorcerer show up and secretly mentor Ranni at the same exact time Renala just so happens to be there also mentoring Ranni. But I think there is enough distinction to illustrate that Renala was a lunar witch. She was not a snow witch. And also the cold spells say that the Snow Witch taught Ranni to fear the dark moon, whereas Renala was the one who guided her towards it. So it seems to be contradicting instructions right there. But what if Renna was just a repurposed marionette puppet that Renala commissioned Celavis to make and disguise for her so that she could teach Ranni these cold sorceries that she learned from the Zamor during her youth as this mysterious mentor from the woods? There is something very curious and suspicious about the Snow Witch's spells. So the Glintstone Ice Crag and Freezing Mist can only be purchased through Celavis. Why does Celavis have 2 of the 3 Snow Witch spells? The third spell is found at Caria Manor, by the way, which just solidifies her relationship to the family. And the other 2 spells that Celavis sells are the Carian sorceries. So he has the Snow Witch spells because 1, she was obviously a part of the royal family, and 2, he is probably the one that made her puppet body in the first place. So something must have either happened to Renna's original body, maybe she possibly died in her pursuit of heretical cold sorcery, and Celavis had to make her a puppet body to transfer her soul. So he modifies a marionette soldier puppet to house it, And maybe that was the start of his puppet obsession. Maybe after Renna, he just couldn't make a puppet that came close to her. And maybe Renna was the design of the marionette puppets that the rest of them are based off of. And if we believe that Celavis is the one that created Renna's puppet body, I think this would actually explain why he wanted Ranni as a puppet, because when you are given the option to give Ranni the Amber Drought, she immediately knows what it's for. She's creeped out by you. She knows who sent it. She knows what it does. So she probably already saw this drought in action once before regarding Renna. And in fact, her puppet body may be the same one that Renna used that was given to Ranni when Ranni killed herself. Renna may have given her puppet body to Ranni with the request that Ranni give the tarnished player her old spirit calling bell in the beginning of the game. I know there is a lot of assumption going on here, but I'm just trying to make a story out of the little information that we have. I personally think that Renna was Renala's sister and Ranni's aunt, because there is a sad little jellyfish spirit at the Stargazer's ruins, and her name is Oriolette. And you can reunite her with her sister by using the jellyfish spirit ashes, and her name is Aurelia. And we learned that they died at 14 years old, and you can find their little gravestones behind the Stargazer's ruins that read, "Here lies Aurelia and Oriolette, who never saw the stars." So Renala and Renna, being named in the same fashion as Aurelia and Oriolette, were most likely sisters and possibly even twins. And if this is where Renala found her full moon, it could have also been where Renna decided to pursue cold sorceries, learning it from their neighbors, the Zamor. And the Zamor were sworn enemies of the fire giants, whereas the astrologers considered the fire giants their neighbors. And the prized treasure of the Kari Manor is the Sword of Night and Flame. So yeah, cold sorceries might have not been something that Renna wanted to practice openly. It might have not been something appropriate for Renala's sister, as head of the academy, as queen of the Kari Manor, for her sister to have been practicing. But this family tie is how Ranni was introduced to the Dark Moon, a blend of lunar and cold sorcery taught to her by her mother and her aunt. While I was working on this video, I wanted to see if anyone else had made a connection between Renna and Renala being sisters, and I came across an amazingly well-written post on Reddit outlining this theory about who the three sisters that resided in the rises behind the Kari Manor were, and this person did such a good job of outlining their theory in text, so you'll have to go check that out for further reading. But their post brought up a theory that I hadn't heard yet, and that is the theory that Selen is the third Karian sister. This theory hypothesizes that the rises originally belonged to the three Karia sisters, Renala, Renna, and Selen. And so Renala eventually gives her rise to Ranni, and Celavis moves into Selen's rise after he helps her escape to safety when the Academy decides to expel her for her experiments in pursuing the primeval current. Ranni is the last princess in the Karian line, and Renala is its first queen. But there are a couple different item descriptions that talk about the Karian princesses in plural. The Karian filigreed crest says that it was awarded to Karian knights who served as direct retainers to the kingdom's princesses. Now there's only one princess, Ranni, daughter of Renala, and the discarded palace key states that it opened a treasure chest passed down to Karian princesses. And inside this chest, you find the Dark Moon Ring. But Renala only had 3 children, and only one of those was a girl. So the other Karian princesses must have been Renala's sisters or her nieces, the original inhabitants of the Three Sisters Rises at Karia Manor. The freezing pot is described as being engraved with the crest of the Karian royals. It originates from the cold, dark moon of Ranni, the Karian princess. And we can see here the seal of the Karia family on it, which is the same crest associated with all of the Karian sorceries. It's also the crest on Renala's and Ranni's moon spells. But the ice crest shield, which you can find at Karia Manor, reads that the ice crest originates from a Karian princess. But this is not the crest of the Karian family. This is not the crest that Ranni uses on her spells, on her freezing pot. This is just a simple snowflake, which makes me think that this iced crest shield, this symbol belonged to the Carian princess, Renna. Another ice connection that I discovered through this same Reddit post that I would not have found on my own is that the frozen needle sword, which is a piercing blade of ice, was forged by Iji, the Carian royal blacksmith. So it may be likely that Iji knew Renna was practicing cold sorceries and forged this blade for her, because this lines up with the frozen armament spell that was used by the Snow Witch. So we know for a fact that she did indeed use a sword. Another way that Ranni might have followed in her aunt's footsteps was by killing her fleshly body. Maybe she knew it'd be possible to get a new body because that's exactly what Renna had done. So back to the Moonlight Altar. There is an elevator here that reaches the depths of Ansel River. And in Renna's Rise, there is also a portal to Ansel River. So this now links the Carian family to Ansel River and the corresponding eternal cities. And where is the elevator to Ansel River located here? Does this count as deep in the woods as described as the Snow Witch set? Possibly. It's definitely hidden in the trees. So now we have another theory. Could Renna have been a Nox sorceress? There are multiple links between the House of the Moon and the Eternal Cities. A very direct link is that there is a Nox swordstress statue in the Church of Vows, and Iji wears a mirror helm, which is fashioned after the Nox mirror helm. And the Nox used to be guided by a lost black moon, so the connection to lunar worship is a passion that was shared by both the Nox and the Carian royal family. And then there's this sword of night and flame. It wasn't called the sword of moon and fire, it was night and flame. So I think this could be another connection to the eternal night sky of the Nox. Although there is an undeniable connection here between the Carians and the Nox, I don't think that Renna being Nox is a strong enough theory. It certainly just doesn't have as much evidence as Renna being a part of the Carian family and being a Carian princess. So I think that is the theory that I am most content with. I think that Renna was probably Renala's sister, and thus this explains Ranni's fondness for her and her willingness to adopt her cold sorceries, and also her taking on her appearance and even introducing herself to you as Renna in the beginning of the game. This wasn't just a mentor-student relationship. It seemed to be a little bit something more than that. I know this video had a lot of information and there is a lot here to digest, so I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any thoughts on this subject, please feel free to add. I always love hearing what you guys think. So, who do you think the Snow Witch was? And tell me about it. I want to give a big special shout out to my beloved channel members. Thank you so much for supporting me. Doomsday Zen, James Flack, Twisted Bishop, Joey, Alexandra Jojo, Dantecoy, Francisco Mena, Crod, and Solomon. Thank you all so much, X's and O's. And if you'd like to support my channel, you can sign up on the membership section of my homepage. Now, who is going to be playing Lies of P? Because I just downloaded that, and as soon as this is uploaded and edited, I'm going to start that game and see if there's some interesting content I can share about that. So yeah, all right everyone, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.